Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. So glad to have you here, like always. In today's video, we are going to be continuing the aviary release series by releasing some beautiful white eyes into the outdoor aviary. Now, if you're not familiar with white eyes, they're also known as Japanese white eyes or Oriental white eyes, and they are from Japan. But they also exist in other parts of Asia, also in Thailand, the Philippines, and in some other locations around the world, like for example, Hawaii. And we're gonna go ahead and loop around to this later on, and you're gonna see why. But for now, we're gonna be releasing them into the outdoor aviary and talking a little bit more about this species, although I don't know much about them because it is the first time that I'm working with them, but I will share some of my experience with them so far. This species of birds is monomorphic. As you guys can tell from looking at the birds right here, it is pretty difficult to tell the difference between the males and the females because they are very similar. Some breeders say that they are able to distinguish them by the color. They say that females sometimes are a little bit duller than males, but personally I haven't seen a difference with the ones that I have. Others say that they're able to tell the difference based on the calls and songs of the males, but I haven't heard any of mine made any special calls or any special songs. They pretty much all sound the same. As you can tell, I don't know much about them because it is a new species, like I've mentioned, that I'm starting to work with, so it is going to take some time for me to get the hang of these birds, learn more about their habits, learn a little bit more about the things that they like, the things that they don't like, and how to successfully breed them. But one of the things that I can tell you guys to be careful with and to keep an eye out on is when you go to purchase these birds. If they are not captive bred, if they're wild caught, it is going to be very difficult to keep them alive in captivity. So make sure that when you do purchase these birds from wherever it is that you purchase them, that you figure out or find out from the person selling them if they are captive bred or if they're wild, because it will make a huge difference in whether these birds survive or whether they end up dying. I've figured out that unfortunately the birds that I received from California were wild caught. And remember when I said that there are populations of these birds in Hawaii? Well, it turns out that a lot of them get imported in, sometimes illegally. And unfortunately, they're wild caught birds that are not used to cages. And the birds that I received were in fact wild caught, and I began to have problems right away. And one of the biggest problems that I had was that from the 7 that got shipped to me from California, right off the back from the shipment, 2 of them died. So you can imagine how quickly I went from being happy and excited that I was receiving new birds to all of a sudden opening up this box and being extremely sad and disappointed at the fact that 2 of these birds had passed away. Now, this isn't something typical to expect when getting birds shipped. I have received many shipments of birds and I've shipped birds also in the past, and this is not something that typically happens. But unfortunately, when the birds are wild, they are going to get stressed out a whole lot faster than birds that are captive bred. And that was the case with these. Unfortunately, since they were wild, apparently during the trip before making it here, 2 of them must have gotten very stressed out, or they weren't properly taken care of prior to being sent off, since they were not eating correctly. And that's one of the problems that I had when I had them here at home. Once I got them finally into their cage and started the quarantine process, I noticed that the birds just weren't eating enough. They did not want any of the fruit pellets that normally these birds enjoy while in captivity. They only wanted to eat fruits, and they wouldn't even touch any of the insects that I would offer them in the cage. Now keep in mind, since they were indoors during this time, I wasn't offering any live insects. All of the insects that I was giving were freeze-dried bloodworms and mealworms, but they weren't taken to them. So with time, I started to notice that with just fruits, they started to thin out. They were getting fluffed up in their cage. They weren't eating enough, and I saw that the birds were starting to lose weight and they were a little bit less active. So I called a buddy of mine that breeds this species, and I asked him what he thought the problem was or how could I correct it. And he told me that unfortunately he believed that the birds that were sent to me were wild caught, and that is how I eventually found out about that situation. He told me that if I kept them in a cage, no matter what fruits I offered or no matter what insects I offered, they would eventually die because they are not used to being in cages. He said my best success at keeping them alive would be to release them into the outdoor aviary as fast as I could. But you can imagine, for me, this was a little bit difficult because these birds, first of all, had to pass quarantine. I couldn't just grab them and toss them into the outdoor aviary and expose all of the other birds to getting some sort of disease that these might have. So I had to keep them inside of their cage for 30 days. Now, unfortunately, during that time, one more ended up passing away. So you can imagine my disappointment to have lost another bird during those first initial 30 days in quarantine. During that time, I kept feeding them a variety of different fruits, from apples to bananas, papaya, guava, grapes, raspberries. I mean, you name it, I would give it to them to try to introduce all these different fruits to them and have them see which ones they would prefer. Now, they only stuck to a couple of them. There were other fruits that they just wouldn't touch, but they did pretty good when it came time to eating the fruits. The pellets, they still did not touch them during that time, or any type of egg food or soft food that I would offer. They wouldn't touch any of that stuff, nor would they touch any of the freeze-dried insects. But luckily, 4 of them did end up surviving. They passed the 30-day quarantine, and I quickly released them into the outdoor aviary. And after a few days, the difference was like night and day. The birds started to perk up. They weren't fluffy anymore. They started to consume more fruits, and they even started to consume a little bit of the egg food that I was providing for the other finches. Shortly after that, they started to accept some of the pellet foods that I was giving them earlier on while they were in the cages, and they just weren't taking it. But now, for some reason, they were more willing to accept these foods, and they spent a large variety of time on the floor of the aviary and around the podocarpus trees looking for small aphids and insects. And I think that just being free in a large outdoor aviary made the world of a difference for them. And that was one of the things that ended up saving these 4 that you see here. So although I was very sad to have lost some of them, I did learn a bit from that experience, and hopefully that helps you guys out. So if you do plan on getting these birds, just make sure that you are getting them from a reputable dealer, that is somebody who is actually breeding them, and they are captive birds, not wild caughts. I hope that you guys have enjoyed the video. Like always, if you did, consider subscribing to the channel. If you haven't done so already, remember to hit that thumbs up button. And I hope you guys have a wonderful day. We will see each other in the next video.